Dad of War. Today I'm going to be giving you a review on it. Now, a lot of people have kind of already picked what side of the aisle they're going to be standing on. They either like the game or really hate the game for various reasons. I'm just going to be giving my take, since reviews are subjective. Take it for what it is. You don't have to agree with me. You can disagree all you want. And again, you can always agree. But I think we should talk about this game because I think it's actually pretty good and pretty bad at the same time, and we'll talk about why. So if we look at the box art, it's kind of like meh. There's not like a whole lot of crazy graphics going around, and I don't know, maybe I'm a little old school, but I like back in the day when they used to do that cool little thing, how they used to kind of put little cutscenes to show you what the game would be like, certain aspects of gameplay that they're highlighting. I wish they would have done that. Most games don't do that nowadays, so I guess we'll let that one go. But if we talk about further onto the additional offerings of the bonus characters and what they offer, so I guess maybe you can be happy if you like the color white and gold as, like, I don't know, like he's a Spartan, so I would have expected like maybe like an exclusive Spartan outfit, maybe the OG skins to be like a pre-order bonus, but to see this like kind of like it's a colored version of an armor piece that is literally already in the game, and it just doesn't really feel very unique or exclusive. It kind of removes any real desire to have pre-ordered in the first place, so the pre-order bonus is definitely a little weak in my opinion there. The install size for Dad of War is basically 84 gigs if you're on PlayStation 5 and well over 100 if you're on PS4. Now, this is again in line with what we've seen, so we can't really be too critical here. Games are just going to be really large, so you're going to have to invest in storage. Though I will say it is annoying to see that the game is this big and the graphical improvements aren't really kind of in line with the game of this size.
NANI?
More on that later. Taking to the main menu, you can kind of see a couple different things. I mean, you have the typical story elements and options, but there's nothing really unique, right? And I think this is where these story games kind of, for a lot of people, where we heard a lot of the negativity come from, kind of play into part, because typically when you have a game that's story driven, the only thing that matters in a story game after the story is beaten is its replayability, the replay value. This game, like many other story games, have very little replay value because it's just repetitive and it doesn't really do a whole lot to change that. It would have been nice to see, for example, a challenge mode of some sort included in the game as a separate option in the main menu, to where when you click on it, like old school games, there's all kinds of crazy challenges that really put your gear and your skills that you spent getting up to the test, and it just doesn't happen that way. Another problem is, even though that game doesn't have some sort of replayability through challenge modes or other unique custom modes that we would have loved to see, it just does not have that replayability because it doesn't have chapters. I don't know how many games that are story driven they like to make where it's just a one playthrough and then you restart all over again. I think that kind of defeats the purpose, especially in a game plus mode, for example. I feel like, so you're already acknowledging I beat the game, I've already got all my stats, I've already got all my gear. Let me pick what chapter and what part of the game I want to play. The only way to do this is to have a pre-existing game save onto your drive and then play from that point, but that's kind of pointless because you're not always going to have a bunch of game saves, so I think that's really annoying. Now, this next piece I took a lot of heat for, and I really don't care, because I still feel the same way. The pacing of the story is too slow. Simply put, they spend too many hours on screen talking, to the point where a lot of people have called this a cutscene simulator. It didn't really feel like you were being dropped into this action game. It felt a lot like it was a very slow opening of a movie, and not a very good one. And it's to the point where the pacing of the story has a very roller coaster vibe. It goes up, down, you don't really know like what's happening until they get to certain parts of the story and you go, okay, that's what you're referencing here. It's just, I don't know. I didn't like the writing personally. I thought it had a lot of room for improvement until the latter half of the game. Now, once you get to about midway through the game, it's pretty engaging and the action scenes are a lot more. So the cutscenes are a lot more forgivable. But in that opening scene, you know, the boy with his wolf, you know, he's crying over the wolves, but then he has to fight a wolf, and it's just all this stupid contradictory stuff that I just, from a writing perspective, did not appreciate. Again, that's to each their own, but that's my take on that. More unforgivingly, though, I think is the way that the story kind of doesn't have a built upon theme. And what I mean is like, okay, so in the last game, he was a dad. We all know that he's trying to build his son up and all that stuff. And now they're trying to establish the opening story again as him being a dad. We already know that, so don't spend the first half of the game establishing the fact that he's a father. We get it. But the whole game plays on the theme that he's a father, hence the name of this review, Dad of War. Even to the final boss, it's all about your children and being a dad. Did we really need a Kratos like that? I don't think we did. Now, again, personal opinion. That's what a review is. But again, I really can't stand the pacing of it though. Now, the art style of this game can be characterized as one thing in my personal book. A little lazy. Because if you really look at it, it just loses a lot of the high next-gen aspects that we were expecting. And to the point where you're in performance mode. There is no good reason why you can't be in performance mode at, say, 1440, 60 FPS with maxed out textures and resolution. It doesn't happen here. Now, I, again, similarly receive flack from players that love the game and apologize all of its flaws away, but I'm not one of those people. For me, I really would have liked them to implement some form of a high-resolution mode that has really tack-sharp visuals. Now, of course, you can always go into performance mode, but that runs at 30 FPS, and that is a joke on next-gen consoles, so there's no point in using it if you're like me and you bought a PS5 for high frame rates. Which kind of goes into the next thing. The higher the frame rates, the worse the visuals get. That's just how the game plays. And I think for me, when you combine that in with the dated mechanics, it gets to be really lazy because it runs exactly like the last game from the way you move, you swing your axe, it's a copy and paste. I would have really loved to see some more of the fluid gameplay come back that we saw in the older games. I loved how the Chaos Blades, or the Blades of Chaos, were just more swingy than they were in the older games, a lot faster than they are here, where it feels a little bit more sticky, especially when you hold the right bumper to pull off that combo. It never really feels smooth. It feels very clunky the way he pulls off that combo when you hold the right bumper. Now, generally, when you're swinging the blades around, you can have a good time, and they feel okay, they feel responsive enough, but it never really feels quite as good, in my opinion, as it did on the older games. And I think building upon that and building, like, let's say, actual combos would have been really cool. To now there's a challenge to pull off this new combo, not necessarily making it like a fighting game, but giving those more advanced players options to move in the direction of more advanced gameplay versus what feels to be kind of just a copy and paste of the last game. New players, though, will be happy to know that this game is really easy to pick up. It's not terribly difficult. If you click give me a story, they'll give you a story. The only downside that I find is, like, early on in the game, they don't really give you a waypoint. So, like, in the opening scene where you're, like, at the house, I did spend a little bit of time running around, and I got a couple of locations wrong as to where I could go, but the game isn't so challenging or so vast that you can't figure out where you need to go if you get turned around. I do wish there was always a waypoint for people who wanted one, but again, for the exploration types, it gives you a little bit of that in the opening. Not so much towards the end of the game where things are a little bit more linear, but again, it's there. Now, you'll also be proud to know that despite people being really angry about Angrboda being a black girl, there are no politics in this game. So for people who are trying to bash the game and say it was just politics and all that stuff, it's really not. It's a fun game that I didn't run into anything like that. So that part, I can completely say when I've heard people saying that, it's just wrong, because she did a great job, by the way. Angrboda, the person that played her, did fantastic. I couldn't tell you how immersive it was when that character was in the screen talking to Loki and doing all that stuff. That was a really immersive part of the story. And I think especially you'll appreciate it the more the story progresses, and then the more you see how things play out without giving too many spoilers on what her role is. So that I thought was really cool. Now, I think we have to look at it realistically and say, like, how often are we going to play this game? That kind of determines if a game is worth anything in my book. And I think this is a good game. It's honestly, frankly, probably the best game of 2022 so far. Now, that's not a compliment, because we haven't had really good games this year. We just haven't. But this is absolutely the game of the year this year. Despite what some people think about Elden Ring, this one takes the cake, because it just does a lot to engage you enough, even though the opening is slow, that once you get the story going and you get into the game, it is fun and you have a lot of time and you're on, like, almost like an interest trip. Like, hey, like, I want to know what comes next. Like, you're kind of like waiting for the next little bit as it comes. And it's a fun experience that almost anyone of any walk of life can pick up and enjoy. And I think for video games, that's so important. Now, Again, realistically, how often would you play it? That's where we have a little bit of a problem, because they don't have chapters, so you can pick your favorite parts of the story to say, you know what, I like this chapter because all the action was in this scene. If they would have done that like we see in some Tomb Raider games or even some other games, I think that would be more ideal than the kind of format that we have now. Or I think it was like Uncharted, actually. I just stick with PlayStation. Uncharted lets you pick chapters, and this really doesn't. My point being is, like, chapters aren't hard to implement. They need to work on that with these storytelling type games so we can pick what we want. Outside of that, though, it was a really fun experience, and even though it was slow in the beginning and I had a terrible time, bored out of my mind, once I gave it a little bit more time, again, coming back to it, because I'll be honest, I had to pause and come back to it, but once I came back to it, I really did have a blast, and it was a lot of fun. The puzzles are engaging, they challenge you enough, but not too much, which I can appreciate about puzzles not being too difficult, but just challenging enough. All in all, I would say this game is a solid 8 out of 10. It is a really good game, and I think a lot of people will like it. Again, there's no such thing, I think, in my opinion, as like a perfect score, and it would have been a 9 if it would have had chapters and wouldn't have been a copy and paste combat-wise as the last game. So just to kind of go into why it got the rating it did. But again, be that as it may, this is just my take, but I'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.